Just waiting for a few more people to join. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angie Pham, and I am the Community Development Worker at Waterloo Region Community Legal Services. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn workshop entitled Waterloo Housing Crisis 101. As a disclaimer, this session is being recorded for those who could not attend. If you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat box where I'll be monitoring. Thank you again for your attendance. I'd also like to offer a land acknowledgement. Though we are meeting virtually today, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples, and thank them for allowing us to do our work on their traditional lands. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Lou Roberts from Waterloo Region Community Legal Services, as well as Hollee George, Heather Majaury, and Lesley Crompton, who will be joining us from Social Development Center, Waterloo Region. And I will now hand things over to them. Thank you.
Okay, I think that means me. So I'm just going to start. We're having a couple of technical difficulties because that's kind of what happens on Zoom sometimes. So just letting you know that Lesley Crompton may end up having to join us by phone. And we're just trying to troubleshoot that right now. So I would just like to introduce myself. My name is Heather Majuri, and I am currently working at the Social Development Center as the Civic Hub coordinator. But last year I was working with a Better Tent City and helping to document that progress of that project. My Anishinaabe spirit name is Gabadate Iwasiak. I am an Algonquin Anishinaabe, but also what people used to refer to as French Indians. I come from an off-reserve community. I am a not status under the Indian Act, and I come from a nation that was never treated post-Confederation. We were part of the Peace and Friendship Agreements from 1763 and 1764, along with the original 7 nations or 7 fires of Canada from the 1701 Treaties of Montreal. So that just gives you a quick indicator of who I am. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and I'm a resident of Block 2 of the Haldeman Tract. We're going to go to a slide now, a slideshow that's going to accompany the things I'm going to talk about. And I'm just going to be introducing our 2 speakers today within the context of what we're talking about, which is the Waterloo housing crisis. And this is Waterloo Housing Crisis 101. So you don't have to be somebody struggling with housing to attend this seminar. You also may be someone who is within the service structures that support and help people who are struggling with housing security in various ways. And you may also be somebody who just is from the general public and wants to understand more. Everybody is welcome. The more we can understand about the complexity of this ongoing issue, the better, I think, for everybody in the region and everybody who cares about their neighbors. And I think at the end of the day, what we are really talking about are our neighbors, people that we care about, that we share services with, people that we share neighborhoods with, people that are in varying degrees of privilege or scarcity. And we have to look at that and find better ways to share. So you'll start to notice on this slide, I've had to change a few different formats, so things may not totally come out the way we would like them to in terms of the changes in the formats. But what I've created here is just a small replication in a graphic of a treaty that was pre-contact and also post-contact between many Indigenous nations, as well as within treaty agreements with European powers that came to Turtle Island. And it's called the Dish with One Spoon. The gist of it is that we are here to share these lands together, and that we have responsibilities to keep what they called the dish, which is the land, clean, and to take care of those lands together. So it's not any one group's responsibility, it's all of ours together to be able to do that. Inside this dish, you'll see that we also have a specific location, and we can now move to the next slide. I'll get onto that after. So I'm just going to see now. Okay, and go ahead and click. So I'd like to start by just offering a little bit of information about the time we are in this time at this point. What is really interesting is I think when I speak, the animation stops on my end. I don't know if it stops on other people's ends. So I'm just going to speak regardless. And if you're seeing a nice picture being drawn, that's awesome. And if not, well, that's just life. But we are in the time of the strawberry moon. In the Anishinaabe-Moan language, this is Odeman Gizes. And this is the time to harvest what we call the heartberry, or the heart medicine, mishkiki, Ode mishkiki. And we're also in the time of the solstice, which happens to also be on June 21st, the National Indigenous Peoples Day. So I just wanted to acknowledge these things that are happening right now, the time of year we're in, and say thank you to all of our relations, Neen the way Maganaduk, and all of creation for allowing us this beautiful place to be, and acknowledge our responsibilities to that. And we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, we should be able to click it again. Yay, there we go. As Algonquin, Abitiwissa Winnewag, Madueskarini, Anishinaabe, as well as a Canadian citizen and employee of the Social Development Center in Waterloo Region, and a resident of Block 2 of the Haldeman Proclamation of the Six Nations of October 25th, 1784, I respect and acknowledge that I live, work, and benefit from lands where all required principal and interest paid by the purchasers of Block 2 was not credited to Six Nations trust accounts, and no discharge of mortgages can be located while the proceeds from Block 2 were used to run Canada. I also like to acknowledge and respect that I live, work, and benefit on traditional lands acquired from the Mississauga of the Credit from Treaty Number 3 in 1792. Before this time, I'd like to acknowledge and respect that this is the ancestral homelands of the Chinantan Neutrals prior to contact with Europeans and during the conflicts that ensued during the Beaver Wars of the 1600s. Obviously, there's a lot more to share with you in all of that, but at least this gives us a door to open on the history of where we're located currently and specifically. Today, we're going to talk about bridge building, wraparounds, filling gaps, and reducing siloing in terms of how we're going to deal with the housing crisis as it evolves. And the next slide is great. Awesome, and we can just click to layer on, and this is just allowing us to root ourselves where we live. So I live in Kitchener. I live in downtown Kitchener, actually, which is in Block 2 of the Haldeman Tract. And you can see that with the arrow to that area. And we live within those sacred agreements of the dish with one spoon. There are many other agreements as well, but I think that if we can focus on the spirit of the dish, we have a fighting chance in starting to alleviate the pressures of being unsheltered in this region. So we can move on and go ahead and click again. So the reality is that we're an urban community. We are very diverse, and we are gentrifying as well, which has several issues that come up with regard to how people are treated as they are displaced from their own communities. And it's often invisible what occurs, and it's often unseen, especially by middle classes and upper classes, unless it's pointed out most of the time. So welcome to the Region of Waterloo Housing Crisis 101, and we can continue. Yay. So as most people are aware, although I'm hearing some people think that housing is earned, housing is actually a human right. We have a right to shelter. How that evolves and how that housing is acquired and provided is not quite so clear, but it is a fundamental human right to have shelter from the cold and to have access to basic services and the basic things that we need to live, like water, like food, clothing, and shelter. A question to ask yourself wherever you sit within whatever location inside Kitchener-Waterloo, you should think in terms of, are you compliant with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as the United Nations right to housing, which actually shows up in several different documents of various covenants, remembering that covenants are treaties at the international level that Canada has signed on to. Within our municipality, we have what are known as Neo-Vagrancy Laws, and these Neo-Vagrancy Laws are what make homelessness criminal. So not only is somebody confronted with not having anywhere to be and to be protected, we've now criminalized something that they have no control over, and that is deeply problematic. It's actually in violation of international law. And these neo-vagrancy laws were slipped back into municipalities in the last maybe 20 years or so, for the most part. Before that, they were actually removed from criminal laws at the federal level. And vagrancy laws have a 700-year-old history in English criminal law. So they've been transferred more almost to like small fines and things like that. But they are what make homelessness criminal in our city, and they are enforced currently. So can we move forward? I'm almost done. Bear with me. So I just wanted to also point out that there is a great guide right now to how to deal with homelessness, especially with Indigenous peoples. And often if you look at any sort of legislations that are focused on reconciliation currently, whether they be calls to action, Supreme Court decisions, or recommendations from various reports, what you're going to notice is they actually create a better life for everybody. So it's a good idea to become really familiar with what these recommendations, calls to actions, and requirements are, because they're actually going to support an increase in a better life for everybody in the big picture. Homelessness, when it comes to Indigenous understandings, also includes various wider perspectives of displacement, which is also very similar in some ways to people from other countries that have been displaced due to situations beyond their control or persecutions. Also, it's a holistic understanding that we can be displaced from our original communities, from our nations, from our ways of doing things, from our cultural expressions, and all of that. So within the structures that are dealing with the practicals of housing, food, and clothing, and those things, we can also experience another layer of displacement that is often invisible and unaddressed. And we can move forward. and click on. So you'll see here that I'm drawing a medicine wheel, which is often used within Anishinaabe culture, as well as other Indigenous nations on Turtle Island, as a transmitter of cultural knowledge. What I've done, I've placed the 4 definitions of homelessness that are currently being used within the wheel. So we have at risk of homelessness, we have the provisionally accommodated, we have the emergency sheltered, and then we have the unsheltered. I've placed the unsheltered at the top of the medicine wheel in the northern direction because to me that is a place of wisdom and a place of eldership. And often those who have experienced chronic unsheltered lived experience are some of our wisest authorities, and they are the ones that are the most often disrespected and the most often discriminated against in severely chronic ways. So I think it's important to look at that. Hollee yesterday in one of our meetings was talking about the 7 grandfathers, and I thought, yeah, what a wonderful group of teachings on how we may want to deal with each other in terms of how we're going to move forward, whatever our location is in society. And you can see we included a few little cartoon images here depicting various things that happen in our lives, various rituals, various ceremonies. We travel this wheel throughout our lives from childhood until we land, like everybody does, at death's door and moving through that. So we come into life, we leave life, and a whole bunch of stuff happens in between. And then there's a whole bunch of people who are interrelating with each other, and we need to look at where we sit in that community and neighborhood and start to understand how we can enact, and I'll choose my words carefully in that way, being honest, being brave, practicing humility, being respectful, showing that wisdom and finding that wisdom and guidance, acting from a place of love, compassion, kindness, and then reaching that inner place of truth about, in this case, what is the true nature of homelessness and why does it exist at all? Okay, we can move forward. I'm almost done, close. I'm a little over time. I just wanted to bring you back to the calls to action, the 94 calls to action. You will not find a call to action that is specifically about housing. What you will find is you will find that all of the contributing factors to a lack of housing actually are woven through these recommendations and these calls to action. So when these calls to action are enacted in whatever context you are existing in, you will end homelessness. And continue. So housing is a human right. You may have heard, may not have heard of a Better Tent City. This was a evolution from the gentrification that was happening in the downtown core here, where a group of people together with Nadine Green, who was evicted from downtown, as well as about 35 to 50 other people who were essentially in violation of vagrancy laws, and also could not set up tents anywhere because we have no designated lands for tents at this point in time, because I believe our community is extremely NIMBYous, which means not in my backyard. And therefore we've reduced human beings to basically invisible entities that if they are seen in any way, shape, or form, they will be criminalized, and then they'll be housed in the prison system if they're lucky. So this is a list of links that we will provide you within the next 24 hours. I just need to fix it up a bit. But this should at least orient you to the things that I've shared in this presentation. If you want to help Better Tent City, because they're having a hard time now finding a piece of land to actually exist on even though there's like 30 houses or whatever that are completed, they have electricity, they have everything they need to survive. By all means, you can connect. Also, Deb Chapman, I would consider to be a friendly counselor to a Better Tent City. So that is somebody also you can connect with if you're hoping to contribute as a resident of the city and making change happen. Okay, we're almost done. And then I'll let everybody else speak. I just want to introduce you to Lesley, who may be coming over the phone. I'm not sure. She is our tax clinic accountant, basically, bookkeeper, and she will help people with their taxes, which is often a barrier to getting service, believe it or not. If you're homeless and you want to be supported and you go to Lutherwood, you have to, because of provincial legislation, do your taxes. As silly and ridiculous as that is, it's the truth. This was a matrix I was creating around barriers, gaps, bridges, wraparounds. It's something else I can share as well. And we also, you'll see on the links, we have a regional, what do you call it, like a pocket card that allows people who are experiencing homelessness to access at least some connectors and helpers that are connected through the region services. And continue. And you can click that one on and it'll just start in a minute. I'm going to now introduce Hollee George. She is somebody who is now with the Social Development Center. She is awesome and she is eviction prevention. She's also a multifaceted woman with an incredible amount of legal understandings of the world. She's also Anishinaabe, who is two-spirited. She rocks, and she is a wealth of knowledge. I just want to remind everybody that June is Pride Month, and let's celebrate. All right, we're going to move on, and that's it for my slideshow. Chi miigwech.
Miigwech, Heather. Bonjour, Musco Gijugo Kwe Dijnakas, Nemado Dem, Ajudenan Donjaba, Parawami Ojibwe, Nishmane Doagakwe. What I've just said to you in my traditional language, which is Ojibwe, hello. And in that, I'm not just greeting your being, I'm greeting your spirit as well. And as Heather said, my name is Hollee George, but that's my colonial name. My spirit name is Red Sky Woman. I belong to the Sturgeon clan, which is a teaching clan. And here I am today teaching. I belong to the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point, which is, I often say, between London and a cornfield, but really it's between London and Sarnia. And I've been living and working here on the Haldeman Tract for the last 4 years. And I guess what I have to say is that I want to bring the urban Indigenous two-spirit perspective to the conversation here. And one thing I need to point out is not just generally as Indigenous people, but particularly as two-spirit people, we're the originally evicted. We are the originally displaced people of this country. And so we need to move forward in whatever way or whatever function you're in, service that you're in, structure that you're in. Be mindful of the fact that Indigenous people are the first people to be displaced. And so one thing that I think is also important to realize is that oftentimes two-spirit people, Indigenous people, we often hear, go back to the reserve, you Indians, those kinds of hideous statements, but no one understands that there is nowhere to go. The Indigenous community is a fast-growing population. The reserve boundaries are very, very small. We are outgrowing reserve boundaries, and quite frankly, speaking both from professional experience and personal experience as a two-spirit person, it's not safe. It's not safe. And I say that because our communities, as a result of colonization, our communities are deeply, deeply rooted in homophobia and transphobia. And when our traditional boundaries, when our traditional territories are reduced to reserve boundaries and we're outgrowing this, where do we go? I was born and raised in the concrete jungle. I was born and raised off the reserve. And that's a good thing, and it's not a good, it is, but it isn't. It's good, but it's bad. Even if I wanted, and this is the story of many, even if we wanted to go home, even if we wanted to go back to the res, where are we going to go? There is no opportunity. Jobs, support services, housing, all of those things. So as settlers come into our territory, our people are not, we're not only getting squeezed out, but we're outgrowing those colonial boundaries that are set for us. So we come into these urban settings with a whole backpack of issues. And I want to bring a point here. I don't know who everybody is here, but I have to say, from the criminal law context, if any of you have ever heard about Gladue, the Gladue decision came down from the Supreme Court of Canada in 1999, and it's been very slow to, I guess, come to Ontario. And it is transferred outside of, these are principles and factors that are transferable beyond the context of criminal law. I've seen it in criminal, I've seen it in family, I've seen it in community legal clinics. And Gladue principles basically say, or Gladue factors basically say, that Indian people, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people, you will hear fluidity in our language because that's the nature of our existence. We're Indians, we're Aboriginal, we're Indigenous, we're all kinds of things. So we use language fluid depending on what we're talking about. But in the criminal context, the Supreme Court of Canada basically has said that it is generally accepted and indisputable that Indian people have experienced substance abuse, violence, mental health, individual, community, and family dislocation and fragmentation, a number of different things, racism, all of these systems are at play in that experience. And what, in the criminal context, again, they've said, what can we do other than incarceration, because it is generally accepted, because it is indisputable that the impacts of colonization contribute to the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the jails, in the prisons, in the child welfare systems, and all of these various systems, social assistance as well. So one thing that's great and wonderful about this region, I think, is that we're seeing through some of the systems where Gladue factors or Gladue principles are being used and thought about as we make decisions with, for, and about Indigenous people, because it really makes no sense to create or contribute or further the impacts of colonization when we already know. And even in 1999, the Supreme Court of Canada said, what can we do other than incarceration? Well, through the SDC and the eviction prevention program, we're transferring those principles and looking at the Indigenous experience and saying, what can we do other than eviction? And certainly we support all tenants through the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge regions. I have a counterpart that works in Cambridge in eviction prevention, but though we support all tenants in those three areas, we do have a particular focus on 2S LGBTQ, BIPOC, refugees, newcomers. And that's really important because those particular populations are so underserved and so unseen and so unheard. And so as part of eviction and prevention, we are going to be the eyes, the ears, the voice for those tenants in those most vulnerable populations. We provide support to tenants through advocacy, intervention, mediation, negotiating, developing alternative plans of care to those households, I guess is how I want to position it, because it really is about caring for the whole household, the whole family. We will provide access to landlord-tenant boards through safe and private space. What we know so far is that people are not showing up. People are not showing up to landlord-tenant board hearings. And if they have issues with the system, it's often at the 11th hour. So our job is to help them navigate that system, support them through that system. We are there to be community home visitors, wherein we will go into homes and be the eyes and be the ears and be the voice, because particularly, and again, I'm bringing the two-spirit perspective, it's not always safe for us to talk to people. I have already had circumstances where homophobia is a basis for some of the housing issues, for sure. So that's where the community visiting and the outreach and the tenant support directly side by side is really important. What else? Oh, we are also mapping. Social Development Center has already started some time ago at mapping displacement in the region, and we're an enhancement to that. So as eviction prevention gets rolling, we have the ability to map compliant and non-compliant landlords, and to be able to hold non-compliant landlords accountable for violating the rights of 2S LGBTQ, BIPOC, newcomers, refugees, and we're feisty. We're feisty. Myself and Michelle are a great team. We're absolutely have the professional and personal experience. And that's what I love about the SDC, is that they've built a team around housing and around these issues that are really representative of the community. And that's a huge, huge deal. So I'm really happy that we're able to fill some of these gaps in service. I don't know what else to say about that. I'll just wing it after Lou, I guess. I can't think of anything more. Other than we do have I should probably put this out, renters educating and networking together, RENT. There is a tenant support group available in this region, and we support it as the SDC. We support their visions, their voices. We amplify tenants' voices. So yeah, watch for that. Renters educating and networking together. Miigwech.
That's totally awesome. Chimigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Hollee.
So my question is, was Lesley able to at all connect with us? Because we were going to introduce her next, but I don't know if she is able to get on. Do you know, Lou, or
I'm not sure.
I think Lesley is on with us by phone.
Awesome. That's
Lesley,
great.
If you're able to.
I would like to introduce our bookkeeper with a heart. And hopefully we can get her on the air. Is that possible?
Lesley, are you able to unmute?
Hello, this is Lesley.
Yay. It's like an old radio talk show.
Yeah. That's nice.
So I don't know what you heard earlier, Lesley, or not, but I would just love for you to kind of share a little bit about what you do down at the SDC in the basement of the church, and a little bit about the Unsheltered Campaign. And it's about 12:37. We have until 1:30 for questions and stuff. We also know people may need to leave and all of that, so don't feel like you're insulting us if you have to go. But hopefully we'll at least have a couple, maybe 5-10 minutes before 1 o'clock to troubleshoot a couple of questions if anybody has to leave. And then after that, we got a half an hour to chat.
Well, great. Thank you, Heather, for inviting me to attend this. So I have multiple roles. My name is Lesley Crompton. I have multiple roles at the Social Development Center of Waterloo Region. One of the significant roles that I have had since March of 2020 was being the co-lead for the Unsheltered Campaign. And that campaign came out of our observations during the beginning of COVID about the lack of services for those that were truly unsheltered, those that were living in encampments, those that were living on the street, as we were encouraged to shelter at home. And what became apparently obvious to us was that there were significant limitations on access to washrooms, clean drinking water, food, especially in the early days. But this has actually continued throughout the year. And unfortunately, while the shelter system had increased its capacity over the winter with the overflow for the men's shelter and such, we are still seeing that going into the warmer weather, when individuals want to be out in encampments and such, there is still a significant significant limitation on accessible, 24/7 accessible washrooms and drinking water. This has been discussed with the region. We're actually part of a homeless and housing committee, and where we were just discussing that last week about that particular fact, especially as we have noticed that there are still a lot of individuals, new individuals, reaching out for help, and that are homeless or precariously housed. And that was the other activity that we continued on with, is we actually broadened our food program and worked with a number of organizations. So they were actually providing food to those that are precariously housed. And Heather mentioned the pocket card and provided that in the slides. The pocket card is actually not just for those that are homeless, but those that are precariously housed. So they may or may not, they might be at the end of eviction, or a lot of the services are also for those that are food insecure. So we also engage with a lot of individuals that may have shelter, but their income is going to keeping that shelter. So at the end of the day, especially those on OW, ODSP, as many of you probably know, because I expect that they're your clients, that these individuals do not have a lot left over for the other necessities. Recent documentation indicates, especially for a single male, that chances are at least 60% of his income is going to rent. So we used to use a benchmark of 30% of your disposable income, so your net income after taxes, if you were working, should go towards your rent. In this region, that 30% is not even feasible for a large majority of individuals. And this is resulting in the ongoing housing crisis that we're seeing, and the need for resources like Hollee and Heather and all the other resources that we have. Right, and you know, while the region has started working groups on housing and homelessness, and they have working groups for adult men, women, youth, and unsheltered/homeless. I'm not exactly sure if they have a separate group under Waterloo Region or a broader Waterloo Wellbeing for the Indigenous groups. So we're working on that. The region has, you know, announced that they have moved from 10,000 new supportive housing units in 10 years to 10,000 in 5 years. So they've shortened the space of time, but you know, realistically, this is all new builds, and it's not anywhere close to covering off the 10-year waiting list that already exists for supportive housing, as well as those that aren't even on that particular waiting list, and people that continue to face that. You know, one of the other challenges within the region, and we have this discussion with them on a regular basis, is the fact that they focus on new builds. The regions, the cities focus on new builds, as opposed to looking at new and innovative ways to have housing. And those that are in the field, you know, and I was at a webinar last week, a town hall, and of like-minded people. Well, we have lots of ideas. The challenge is that the region, the councillors, the mayors are not interested in these ideas. And the ideas can range from rent controls, housing shares, a better approach to boarding houses or lodging houses. What else have we got? Tiny homes. So we've seen that although A Better Tent City has spent a year trying to find a new home, they are now very precariously housed. They have everything to be housed other than a piece of land. And the region and the cities have not stepped up and provided any support in finding that land. And nor do they have a solution for those 52 people that are out of Better Tent City. So should there not be a solution, the region, the cities have not even been able to find 52 additional housing spots for those people that are housed there. And that just adds to the crisis. You know, we've seen in the news that you can put a tiny home on your property throughout Kitchener. I think it's just Kitchener. So for those that have a big enough property, you can put one of these tiny homes on your property. However, there are a number of additional requirements to that bylaw, one of them around parking, that really makes it unfeasible for the average person to put a tiny home on their property. Really, it's going, if anybody's putting tiny homes or granny homes on their property, it is going to be those with large, extremely large lots, extremely wealthy, and they're able to put 3 cars side by side in the driveway, which is one of the requirements. The region wouldn't even back off on that at the recent committee meeting. So unfortunately, there's lots of solutions out there. There are some new players in town. So there is, I think, a start of a new land trust from Union, which will provide some more housing. There is some housing coming in from the old St. Mark's is being converted. But again, we're looking at a small number of truly deeply affordable units. You know, when you look at people that are in supportive housing, what we call the deeply affordable units, their annual rent, and I know this from doing the taxes, runs anywhere from $1,100 a year to $3,000 a year. That is what they call deeply affordable for those individuals that are on ODSP, OW, looking to be able to balance out what they get versus what they pay in rent and what they have for extras. So that's sort of a snapshot of where we are. I know the region is working hard and they're good intentions, but we need to really get them moving faster and thinking more innovatively. I guess the other thing that I'm very involved in, and I think Heather had a little slide with my picture on it, is I run a free tax clinics for low-income individuals. And my goal with this is to make sure that we're putting financial control and self-determination into individuals' hands. And we're working hard. I've got a variety of programs that I'm expanding where I'm actually looking for interested individuals from marginalized communities, newcomers, Indigenous, low income, and anybody that is interested in learning how to do their own taxes, potentially being a tax volunteer, and potentially even taking that out into their own communities and running their own tax clinic. And that's really how you can put self-determined, and that's just sort of the start of this longer term program I'm looking at, to put financial control and self-determination back into each individual's hands. You know, when we do taxes, it's not just a quick drop in, I do your taxes and I don't ever expect to hear from you again. We have ongoing relationships. You know, when someone, their taxes is done and they get the notice of assessment, they will come back, we will help them with their inquiries. We've helped people get on to the MyCRA website. And we even help with other questions for other services, either providing them such as legal aid connections and such. And we've worked with a number of agencies in town. Even this year, Ontario Works and ODSP workers, caseworkers, were actually referring individuals to us. And I think that I am probably going to just wrap up there because it's 10:02 and open the door for questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lesley. Appreciate it. Really appreciate everything that Hollee was able to share as well. I have one correction that I have to make. It has to do with Lutherwood. Amber Fitzgerald just wanted me to clarify that the two programs that you need for assistance with your taxes, you have to have your taxes done to access the program, or you get support in getting those taxes done, is COHB and PRA. One of the conversations we've been having lately is there's a lot of acronyms in the world. And one of the things agencies are tending to do a lot is they tend to share their acronyms without like telling you what they are. So with that in mind, I'm going to still assume this is for like the transitional housing program and being able to move through that program. Clarence Kakaji would be one of the people that could support that program where they do require taxes. Otherwise, there's a lot of other programs at Lutherwood that are awesome that you don't need to get your taxes done for, but I was honing in on that and just wanted to be really clear. So that's it.
Heather,
yeah.
I just wanted to mention Clarence is no longer at Lutherwood.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
So it's all good, but there'll be other people there that can help with that program. And all I wanted you to know again is COHB and PRA, and I think that has to do with transitional housing. And that is to address Amber Fitzgerald's concern. She had to hop off the call, so she just wanted to make sure that was answered. And now I think there's awesome questions, and Lou has a presentation, so let's go.
So I'll do it really quickly. I only have a few slides, so let me share my screen. And I'll try and do this as quickly as possible. Can everybody see?
I can see your screen, Lou, but you'll have to put it in the presentation mode.
Yes, I will get that. Sometimes a box pops up and I don't know how to fix that. So if you see a box, yeah, I'm not sure why it does that or how to even fix it. but that's okay. We'll just move along. So bonjour, ani, hello. My name is Lou Roberts. Lou Roberts Nindinchikas, Neme ni Dodam, Kenora Nadunjbat, Kitchener Andayan. So I am originally from Kenora. My band is Sandy Lake, Ontario, which is a fly-in community. My mom's a residential school survivor, so she went to residential school in Kenora, never really went back to the home community after that. But I moved down here way back in 2005 to go to school, and I've stayed here since, and I'm now the Indigenous Justice Coordinator. So here are some of the things that I do on this slide. So I work out of Waterloo Region Community Legal Services, and we provide services in the area of law such as social assistance, employment, tenant rights, consumer debt law, employment insurance. Under social assistance, it's OW and ODSP. I'm just going to be talking about housing right now, though. So I'm just trying to quickly go through my information before we have questions. Let's see if I can. Okay, so I just wanted to go over just like a little bit about the LTB and evictions, because we help in the areas of LTB. So basically for eviction, the landlord gives the tenant a notice for eviction. It can be, I have for non-payment of rent, but it could be for other reasons. Non-payment of rent is a big one. There are other ones as well, and I'll get to that later. So the landlord will apply to the landlord and tenant board for the eviction. There is a hearing that the LTB holds, and it can result in a number of different outcomes. The standard order for an eviction is 11 days, or there could be a mediated agreement, and then eviction could be avoided. The eviction order is always enforced by the sheriff, so the landlord cannot physically remove a tenant from the unit. Right now, because of COVID, there's no moratorium on evictions. The tenants can and are being evicted. So there were previous emergency orders. The last emergency order was lifted on June 2nd, so just a couple of weeks ago. So from April 8th until June 2nd, the government did make an order stopping the sheriff's office from evicting most tenants. So COVID and housing, the evictions continue during lockdown through the online hearings. And another thing, Hollee mentioned it too, that you know, access and the barriers for online hearings are huge. There's a lot of people that don't have the ability or the means to attend these hearings for various reasons. And so it creates a huge barrier. Rent freeze, there is a rent freeze for 2021, so the landlord cannot increase rent. Repayment agreements during COVID-19. So there is a new law that requires the LTB to consider whether the landlord has attempted to negotiate a repayment agreement. There are private agreements that could be submitted to the LTB without a hearing. So those are some options for tenants. Just want to go over some other COVID-19 considerations, showing your unit or landlord entering for maintenance inspection. So there's no law prohibiting entry. So the landlord can ask for entry into your unit for things such as inspections. They do have to provide notice though. If there is a reason why you think that the landlord shouldn't enter your unit, you have to put your position, or should put your position in writing. But if a tenant does refuse entry, there could be repercussions, such as a possible N5 eviction notice, and canceling your lease, assigning, agreeing to terminate, giving notice. You can leave pursuant to an eviction notice if you do get an eviction notice. Also too, right, if you are self-isolating, you can tell your landlord and let them know that there's a reason why you're denying the entry for whatever reason. So so if you're actually ill from the virus, or you're concerned about people coming into your place that could spread infection, if If you do have a medical condition that makes you more vulnerable to it, that could fall under the Ontario Human Rights Code, meaning that the landlord has to provide accommodations up to undue hardship for your needs. Just a eviction process. So I talked about it a little bit. So the tenant receives an eviction notice. It's a form that is from the LTB. So it could be like an N5, N4. Different reasons for eviction include the arrears, damage, interference with the landlord or another tenant. The next two, the eviction for landlord's use, N12, and reno evictions, N13, are huge now. So our office is seeing huge increases of N12 and N13 evictions. So when we get somebody that gets an N12 or N13, we always say document, document, document as much as possible. N12, I hear people saying, I overheard my landlord saying they just want to rent for a higher price and that's why. So just keeping as much documentation as possible, because again, if you're served an N12 or an N13, the tenant always has a right to a hearing. Regardless. So it doesn't mean that you have to move out by the certain date that it's put on. If you choose to go to the LTB for the hearing, definitely you can exercise that right as a tenant. Yeah, so there, at the hearing, there can be a mediation. So it can go before a mediation goes before a hearing, so it could be settled then. If it does go to a hearing, a tenant can dispute the landlord's application. If there is an eviction, there could be a standard order, but also eviction could be asked or it could be delayed if asked. Also too at the LTB, like there's huge arrears for a lot of reasons. The LTB, I've seen a lot of evictions going into the tens of thousands of dollars. Just for the circumstances with, surrounding COVID and loss of jobs. If evicted, the sheriff is the one that is sent to evict, to physically evict, and they could get involved. From what I'm hearing, there is a 6 to 8 week delay because of the eviction freeze. So it's imminent though, if it goes to that point. And a tenant will know. So the tenant will know and will get information possibly mailed. I'm not sure if it's emailed or not, but they will know that the sheriff is coming and there is a set date. Accommodation and housing, it's a human right. Landlords have a legal duty to accommodate when a tenant is disabled to the point of undue hardship. Making changes to the units, entrances, parking areas, how to communicate with the tenant, like for writing only to a particular support person. The tenant may have to provide relevant medical information though. They don't have to be specific of that medical information, but it's something that may be requested. Just something about maintenance and interference applications. Always pay your rent, even if there are maintenance concerns. If you don't pay your rent, that opens the door for the landlord to have their own application for eviction towards the tenant. There's interference concerns, including tenant-on-tenant disputes. The landlord could be also threatening or harassing a tenant. A tenant could apply as well for illegal entry from the landlord. So if the landlord enters your unit without 24 hours notice. How can you help or get help? So you can make a referral to Waterloo Region Community Legal Services. We can provide legal advice. We have housing lawyers, housing caseworkers, to provide that legal advice. There could be representation at the LTB. I can help an individual. I'm not a lawyer, so my background is social work, so I could provide that support in gathering documents and information and walking them through the process of the LTB. I get a lot of inquiries too about the N12 and N13. So, giving them that information and having them know what their rights are. advocating with the government so that eviction moratorium, you know, extending that because of COVID, writing to your MPP to increase social assistance rates. As we know, it's woefully inadequate, getting rent assistance, and again, that affordable housing that we were talking about. Also to the MP advocating for universal basic income. So, and there's our contact information, and I'm done. So we can open it up for questions.
I just wanted to say too, I answered a couple of questions in the chat, nothing huge so far, but just wanted to acknowledge there was a question about the laws. And yes, I can supply, and I'll do that with the other information, the 3 particular bylaws that criminalize homelessness right now.
And just a quick comment, Heather, to everybody. I can't say it enough, because Indigenous people have been overrepresented in a number of different systems. You know, keep in mind that in 1999, the criminal court system through the Supreme Court of Canada said we need to look at alternatives to incarceration. So which that means is that for all of those people who have conflict with law in the criminal system, they're trying really hard not to put them in prison and jail, because there's so many. So where are they going to go? If you close the doors on community or social programs, you know, that's when the doors to jail open up. You get bounced between systems, caught in between. They don't want you in jail, but there's nothing here, so you're in between. We just have to really, really look and think holistically. And one of the teachings that keeps coming to my mind in this process as a Two-Spirit Indigenous person is we have what's called the 7 generations teachings, which means that when we make decisions, that we look 7 generations ahead. What is the region of Waterloo going to look like 7 generations ahead? Keep that in mind.
So I do see, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to see all the questions in the chat, but I do see one here that just came through. If a landlord tries to raise rent in spite of it being illegal, and you're, say, an international student, is there anything that can be done by the LTB in a reasonable time? So reasonable time is kind of difficult. So the LTB is really backlogged. So I don't know if the LTB would be able to solve it in a reasonable time, just because of how backed up they are. But it is the individual can state in writing potentially that, you know, this is an illegal rent increase, and you know, I'm going to continue paying with the rent that's outlined in my lease or outlined between the landlord and the tenant. I also want to qualify and say, though, that as long as the individual falls under the RTA, the Residential Tenancies Act, that they can do this and go through the LTB. If they don't fall under the RTA in those situations, so if the individual, if the tenant is sharing a kitchen and a bathroom with the landlord, they don't fall under the RTA. So just making sure that they are under the RTA, yeah, just to make sure. So like if they share a kitchen or bathroom with the landlord, they can be evicted at any time. They don't have those rights or protections through the LTB under the RTA.
Which is unfortunate, but that's
Yes.
where community support services come in to fill that gap. Just a note, I don't think I mentioned it because in this forum, but the SDC eviction prevention is available to students for support. I know there's some things happening with the universities and the students housing happening in Waterloo. So spread the word to any students that we will be available to them for help.
I just noticed a question from Kieran, or we just actually wanted to know if they can talk more. So one of the things I just wanted to say to everybody is that we've shared our emails. So if you have any other questions, we can definitely, chat after as well. It is important. The housing crisis is, it's an ongoing issue. It's also now converging with the climate state of emergency, which the region and its municipalities actually declared and now are operating in some ways contradictory to those declarations. So I think it's important that we start to acknowledge that a climate emergency is a housing crisis, and they're not separate, and that they have to be looked at in that way. And we also need to hold our region accountable for those declarations. Otherwise, they simply become tokenistic.
There's a question. For virtual hearings and limitations with accessible or reliable technology, are there services to support clients to attend these hearings? This person says, I think of the KPL and TWC computer labs, but they have closed during lockdown periods.
Yeah, so definitely contact my office, Waterloo Region Community Legal Services, to discuss that. I know Hollee also, you mentioned that support as well.
Yes, that's true. We do have the technology and the space available to anyone who wants to access the LTB hearings online. And we are actually available to be there as a physical support person with them as well as they're navigating that system.
Just to, yeah, so our office right now is closed for in-person appointments, but again, contact our office and we'll see how we can help and what we can do.
In-person's tough everywhere right now. We've just started to do a very slow, measured, careful approach. And it has to do with so many different factors that it's tough. And I think if we all gotta acknowledge how tough it is, because there's so many different factors that are involved in making sure people are safely COVIDized. Taylor Martin from Lutherwood is also, again, wanting to be clear that Lutherwood doesn't turn away people because they don't have their taxes done, and they'll also refer people. That lovely chart that I have also shows a little bit more of that, as well as we'll be sending out the region pocket, the pocket stuffer that helps. But what is important to recognize is that it's provincial legislation that requires certain services that have their taxes done. So as much as I totally recognize that Lutherwood is an awesome service and that's not the concern, we have to also acknowledge that the provincial government requires that people living in poverty who already really have very little money are now required to do their taxes for certain services, including certain transitional housing. Hopefully that'll change. It'll be up to us to make that happen and make that change. We also have to acknowledge as well that there's a lot of gaps in the system right now. So agencies are very limited in some ways about what they can and cannot do. And so then those gaps, who deals with the gaps? And unless we stop siloing ourselves and we work even harder to build certain bridges, especially with the region and and Kitchener and Waterloo, my tendency, my impression of Waterloo, and whoever's here from Waterloo might get offended and it's okay, is that they pretend that they don't have a homeless problem. And it's not true. You have a homeless problem just like everybody else. It's actually not a problem unless you make it one. And it's really important to remember that we can't just hide homelessness. It exists, and it doesn't go away just because we pretend it doesn't. Are there any other questions?
We need green space as Indigenous people. Just a last point, climate justice warriors, hear me. We need access to the land. We need green space. Just a final point from my end.
Cool. And I think you definitely need to have Lutherwood do a lunch and learn, because they've got a lot of really important services. One is they do help support people with evictions and housing searches, and even sometimes last month's rent. So, and again, there's tons of different agencies, and some of the supports that we'll give after this will help people orient themselves to the ecosystem or the ecology of supports in the region. I hope none of my comments have been taken in any sort of way that would say be disrespectful to any of the agencies in town, who are mostly usually underfunded and not as respected as they should be in terms of filling the gaps that are absolutely required to make sure that we have healthy, happy neighborhoods where everybody is considered a rightful member of our society. Is there anybody else? Like, I'm reading some of them, but I can't get through all of them. Like, is there any other questions or anybody's flagged?
Oh, so I see, Kieran, I put my email in the chat. So if you wanted to email me with your yeah, and maybe we could set up something to talk about what with the housing crisis for sure. So Angie's also put in everyone's emails.
Perfect. My understanding too is that that there is a recording of this. So if anybody wants to review the recording, you can do that as well. And yeah, within 24 hours, I'll have those supports up.
There was also a question from Myron. This has been very informative. I have heard the perspective. Lack of supply in general is the reason we don't truly have affordable housing for all. Do you support this argument?
Good question. It's an interesting question, and other people may have other perspectives. I personally think there's more than enough supply. I think a lot of it has to do with property speculation and lack of enforcement of certain regulations to ensure that we have affordable, accessible, and supportive housing, because those infrastructures keep getting moved aside for a lot of condo development. And there is also many possible innovations. It's also important to remember that when somebody's been traumatized by being on the street, they need a certain amount of autonomy and control over how they transition back into our neighborhoods in a way that is going to be supportive of what their needs are, because we don't deal with trauma in as effective ways as we can, or respect that. Does that make sense? That's pretty general. Other people may have more specific.
I feel like it's a almost like a lack of will, right? You know, the redirecting of those resources and what I guess the greater society or our politicians feel is important, and what they will fund and what they won't fund. It's definitely advocating for those. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great, Lou. And I just want to add to exactly what you're saying, that you know, while the municipalities and regions deliberate about all of these different ideas and zonings and hearing the creative solutions, they spend a lot of time deliberating, but we really haven't been moving towards any sort of timely and tangible results in many cases. Lots of talk, not a lot of action. Recognize there's obviously a political component to how we deal with these contentious issues. And that's why all of these discussions and sometimes you know, and I do apologize to any of the agencies or the staff at the region that are engaged, but we really need the community to understand this so that they can become more and more engaged and responsible and start really putting the pressure on the politicians. Because unfortunately, as we always know, often the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oiled. So those that are complaining or are not in my backyard philosophy tend to be very vocal. And when that's all that the politicians hear, then that's where they focus their actions. And so I think that one of the things I would ask those that are on the phone or on this call, sorry, I'm on the phone, so I'm feeling a little bit out of whack, is that, you know, take the time, talk to your politicians, talk to your counselors, show your concern for this and how you actually believe in, yes, in my backyard, that we can all come together and build a bigger and better and stronger community. So that's sort of my perspective on that.
Thank you, Sue Fury, as well, for there is now a YIMBY group in Waterloo, the Yes in My Backyard. So NIMBYs, meet the YIMBYs. Myron says, I believe we could pave over Woolwich and Wilmot and still not have decent affordable housing. Thank you. This argument, from my perspective, is being used to open up these areas to development. Chimigwech, thank you for that.
And just
Yeah, I
something.
definitely.
Oh, who's
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Again, as people are talking, it's triggering my memory. You know, when we don't have, and I'm speaking from an Indigenous two-spirit perspective, when we don't have access to safe and affordable housing, we don't have access to choice, we don't have access to options. And, you know, if I want to be a single lesbian living in the concrete jungle here, I should be able to do that. I don't want to have to feel that I have to stay in an unsafe or unhealthy cohabitation in a same-sex partnership. And that's often what I'm hearing in the community, is that single people, and not just from the queer community, but single people, single women, they want a choice to live alone, to be, you know, to get in touch with themselves and to, you know, heal themselves and be with themselves. Men too, I've heard this from, they want an option. They want to live under their own roof, in their own space, so they can be with themselves to address what it is that needs to be addressed. Because there's a number of underlying things that bring us to the point of conflict with our landlords and other people in the community. So I just wanted to mention that, because, you know, I've seen and experienced that where there is no option, that the queer community sometimes stays in unhealthy and unabusive cohabitation living arrangements, either with family or intimate partners. So, you know, I just needed to bring that up.
It's really significant, because the old adage of why don't they just leave, which is used all the time as a form of victim blaming when it comes to abusive scenarios and housing, is because there's no options. So there's much more than that, but also it has to do with there being no options. So really important. Thank you, Holly. The last thing here, Kieran, just also as a international student, has also said that one of the biggest things that they're frustrated about as well is that because international students are a bit of a cash cow for the universities, that, you know, they bring them in, but then they don't make sure there's enough housing for them.
Definitely seen and have, you know, seen people experience the lack of opportunities available. The rents in this area have gone up so significantly. And again, what I was talking about earlier, those N12s and N13s, the rent evictions, the landlord wanting to move in for their own use, but you know, those that are saying that they have the thought that, oh, maybe my landlord just wants to raise the rent to basically the market value of what's available in this region. And a lot of the people are low income, are not able to rent in the prices that they're going for. Like a 1-bedroom apartment is over $1,000 often. So it's challenging, it's difficult. And when you get that eviction notice, there's so much anxiety and fear of, you know, what am I going to do? How am I going to find something? There's no choices anymore. Do I have to live with someone? And how is that going to work out? And it opens it up too for those issues where you're not covered under the RTA. And, you know, you could be evicted at a moment's notice under those situations.
So I don't know if we've solved the housing crisis right now, but we at least hopefully are generating some community, some networking, and some resource sharing, as well as some knowledge sharing in ways that will empower all of us to move forward in a better way. And hopefully we will be able to shift some trends that are happening in our local area, so that we know that our friends, family, loved ones, people we don't know, people that we might not even like, have a place to live.
Advocating for a universal basic income too. We know it works, you know, and even when, like, the Ontario government canceled that pilot project, but what was CERB, right? When that came out. So we know what's available. We know that they, you know, that it can be done.
They can do it when they want to.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? It's 1:24.
Just one last final thought for me. Bring the people in. Bring the Indigenous people to the table. Bring the Two-Spirit people to the table. Know and understand who they are and what they represent. That's a major point. And I'm not just talking about the people, you know, living and working here. You know, you're in somebody else's traditional territory. Bring in the Indigenous politicians and leaderships, elected Indian Act governance or otherwise, the hereditary chiefs and councils. Don't be afraid to talk to people, because we want to talk as well. So bring us to the tables all the way up.
I also see Sue has said something in the chat about, we also need more housing supports. Just supplying the brick and mortar housing doesn't allow people to be housed successfully. The housing supports available seem to help people get out of the trenches once they become homeless or addicted. There are lots of people who may be neuroatypical who would benefit from supports with organization, food, planning, money management, and a sense of community and belonging. If we could provide more of that, that before they become homeless or addicted, we could save them from that experience. Most definitely, like the approaches that I've seen, you know, are less or more about, you know, the after effect. And that's how, you know, the law around housing works is, you know, it's that you're already in this situation. How can we get you out of it? We really need to go. I'm part of the Crime Prevention Council too. So a big term is that upstream approach, getting those, tackling those issues before they happen. So definitely. Oh, I can't keep up with the comments.
It's really awesome that we're getting this many comments, because
this is great.
It's an important conversation. It doesn't end with this lunch and learn at all. And I think, you know, it's like everything. There's always these new beginnings, and we'll keep evolving this in a way where the messages will get clearer and go out further, and we'll see where things go. But this was amazing. It was lovely to see this many people on this call, and I can't wait for the phones to ring. No, you know, it's awesome, and there's a lot of work to do, and we can do it joyfully, hopefully.
Yes, thank you. I guess we're running close to our time now. So I apologize if I couldn't get everybody's questions. I know there was a bunch that just came up at the last minute. So, but again, our emails are there. You can contact us at our offices at Social Development Center in Waterloo Region Community Legal Services. And we'll be more than happy to talk, and maybe we should do a follow-up to this, another follow-up discussion perhaps. So.
I think the discussion has been really great. Thank you so much for everyone, everyone's participation and insights and information. And thank you again, Lou, Holly, Heather, and Lesley, for all of your knowledge, insight, and all this important information that we really need to take into consideration to ensure that our community is one that's, you know, worth living in and worth enjoying for everyone. And so thank you again, everyone, for attending today's session and sharing your ideas with us. And we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Miigwech. Bye.
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 It was wonderful, Bamapi, and really thank you, legal services people. Chi miigwech.
Miigwech.
Okay.